Dr. Stephen Lowe with Ryan Listerman here at Adam Revival, and we have started a series on apologetics, how to broach hot topic issues and things that we come across today here in 2023. Today we're going to be discussing the big issue, broad issue, historical issue of slavery. Slavery is used in a lot of certain ways these days, but I would say it's mostly used in a political fashion to drive political agenda narrative, and it's even being pushed upon our children. I'm not saying they shouldn't know about slavery, but they should know the truth about slavery. So let's get into it. Ryan, what do you got?
Well, I know that there's been something that's been creeping up more and more in culture, and that's the idea that the Bible is pro-slavery. It is something that's a common claim these days that I see on social media, like whether it's atheists or anti-Christians or even people within the Christian culture are claiming that the Bible is pro-slavery, and they'll point to a handful of different verses to assert their claim.
Okay.
So I think we'll start off this video. I want to read one verse. This is from the NIV translation of Exodus 21:16, and it simply says, so this would be Mosaic law. This is law given to the nation of Israel as it was being formed. So this would be like in their constitution.
Sure.
Anyone who kidnaps someone is to be put to death, whether that the victim has been sold or is still in the kidnapper's possession. What that law, and there's other translations where they'll even the word slavery will be mentioned, and what that law says, it basically condemns to death what we would consider the modern slave trade. The idea that you could go somewhere and kidnap a slave, or kidnap someone and make them a slave, kind of a slavery by abuse of power sort of thing. That was condemnable by death.
I mean, that's as condemnable as you can get.
Yes.
Right? I mean, how else can you condemn it in more stronger terms? I mean, you can't. You lose your life if you enslave someone else.
But
right?
Steve, they'll say, the Exodus, there's laws in Exodus that teach you how to treat your slave. So that's what they'll usually point to when they say the Bible's pro-slavery, because usually the claim is, well, the only way to treat a slave is to release them. There shouldn't be a slave, period. Well, now we need to look at, first we look at the law, those laws through the context of the law, which is, clearly kidnapping someone that's innocent and making them a slave is a punishable by death offense. So how does the nation of Israel historically have slaves? Where did they come from? And I don't know if you have any insight into that.
Fill us in.
Okay. Well, we have to look at where a slave would come from in the nation Israel. We have to keep in mind that this is the year 700 BC, 800 BC roughly.
Right.
The idea of the modern prison didn't exist. Usually, if you broke a law, there was 4 different punishments. If you broke a law and harmed someone else, there was death. That was for like rape, kidnapping, murder, stuff like that. There was monetary compensations. Usually if you broke a law and harmed someone, but it was like, it might not have been an egregious law. And like, for example, to make a modern example, you hitting someone with your car. Like you were driving drunk and hit someone with your car. You wouldn't be put to death, but you would have to monetarily compensate the person for that criminal action.
Which is less than today,
Correct.
Yep.
There was banishment. So sometimes they would usually it was like heresy would a lot of times be banishment. If you just didn't subscribe to God's law, moral law, and you weren't committing criminal offenses, sometimes they would just excommunicate you from and remove you from their culture and send you across the desert to somewhere else.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
and then if you were to say be in a situation where I said about you had to monetarily compensate for your criminal action, but you couldn't monetarily compensate, you were now in debt. You were an indentured
Yep.
servant. That's
Indentured
where
servitude. Yep.
where slavery usually came from, and the other part was war prisoners of war. You know,
Yep.
contrary to popular to our popular culture belief about the nation of Israel was a very progressive nation. Like they were surrounded by barbarism, slave trade.
Yep.
The nation of Israel viewed everyone as a child of God. So everyone
Right.
had inherent human rights, whether they were a prisoner of war, which they then made an indentured servant. They didn't just kill them, you know, which
Right.
that's what other nations would do if they captured Israelis in war. It was just kill them.
Right. Yep.
Sometimes
Same.
they'd
We
make them
see this
slave.
today. Yeah.
Yeah. So now we
So,
have a slave. That's how we have a slave is essentially through how different is a slave in Israel than a convicted criminal in a prison system.
right.
They're
Right.
both don't have the
So,
same rights as someone on the outside. They're
yep.
usually working for much lower wages or no wages at all, and they're serving a sentence. That was, and that's why there's laws about every X amount of years, all debts were completely wiped free. So you
Because
couldn't
it's a
just,
pathway to freedom. It's a
yeah,
pathway to freedom that they gave them. Right.
you couldn't create a generational slave
Right.
system because eventually that in that person's lifetime, if they didn't commit a crime that was punishable by death, they were going to serve out a sentence and their whole family wouldn't be stuck in it like where Israel came from, 400 years of slavery in the
Right.
Egyptians. You would have that in the nation of Israel. You wouldn't have
So,
grandfather, son, all being
okay.
slaves.
So to put that in modern perspective, right? Well, the slavery in America and the slavery in Spain and the product of the Atlantic slave trade, that was chattel slavery, which means those individuals were property of the slave owner. What you're describing, to put it again in more modern terms, are indentured servitude is what the
Yeah,
Israeli slave looked like. There is a
yeah,
pathway to freedom. They weren't chattel slaves. They weren't possessions to the Israelis. They always kind of gave them a way to work towards freedom.
exactly. That's why the modern slave trade um, always was opposed by, especially the Catholic Church, but most Christians would oppose the modern slave trade. That's why that there's Christians who fought, that worked towards ending slavery. In fact, slaver owners' Bibles that they gave out to slaves, they had to edit the Bible to make it clear that, like, so they wouldn't realize that slavery is inherently the
Right,
slave trade and generational slavery was inherently anti-biblical
right.
and
So
anti-God's law.
they would go so far as to edit and remove portions of the Bible explaining what we just discussed here.
Yes.
Okay, so let's and I want to view this from more of the um modern day perspective. And the first thought when they talk about Christian or the Bible being pro-slavery, the first thought should be Moses, right? That should be
Yeah.
your very first thought. How do you discount that with a pro-slavery argument? And I think you did a great job of just dissecting the Bible's view on slavery. Now, I want to take that and I'm going to say this: the Bible is the only reason that the Atlantic slave trade is no more. Okay.
Correct.
It is Christianity, the Bible, that ended slavery throughout the Western world. And you go, well, yeah, but you got to pay your dues and this and that. And people who sit here and pound home, the slavery from the 1700s, 1600s. Yes, it was horrible. It was atrocious. But at some point, the past has to be the past, right? What anyone who brings forward a pro or a slavery argument these days, it's always for political oppression. It's always for revenge, essentially. 600,000 men died, and from 1860 to 1865 in the American Civil War to end slavery. Okay, it was Christianity that ended slavery throughout the Western world. That being said, there are 50 million slaves today in 2023.
Yeah.
Okay, that's far more than ever before in history. Far more. Most of those slaves are held through the Middle East, China, and Africa. So where are you guys now? Why don't you care about the slavery today? The atrocious slavery, the majority of which are children. These political pundits, these activists are dead silent when it comes to slavery today. They could care less. All they care about is black and white and their progressive viewpoints.
To back up a little bit, because you made a great point about the Christian, the Bible and Christianity reforming the slave trade and ending it.
Ending it, yeah.
Um, to speak to the the reformist actions of the church and of Christianity, we can look at where slavery is mentioned in the New Testament. Now, the New Testament will be brought up a lot too, to make the claim that slavery, or that the Bible's pro-slavery, because there's a handful of verses in the New Testament that speak to slaves obeying their master.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that the this basically plantation owners that would use these verses to kind of justify their slave trade.
Sure.
Well, we also have to look at that from a political context of the time.
Mm.
The Roman Empire was the governing body of the world at that point. It was a very pro-slavery government.
Society, yeah.
The way the church won over the empire over the early centuries was not through military might and not by winning battles. It was over martyrdom. It was over winning souls and minds. That's why early church fathers, when speaking to slaves, and in a lot of times the early church was built by slaves and built by the downtrodden of the Roman Empire, because Christianity is about everyone's equal in serving God. Like at the end of the day, we're all equally loved by God. We have different talents and different expectations and different ways we fulfill talents and serve the kingdom, but we all die to ourselves and live for Christ.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
The early message to the slaves was not to create a slave revolution. Imagine how do you think the Roman Church would have viewed Christianity favorably at any point if it was constantly creating slave revolts?
Right, exactly.
And that was why it was the turn your other cheek of, this is how you serve God, is by obeying your slave master, because right now we're citizens in a foreign land. We're not going to beat the Romans in open conflict, and that wasn't the goal. Actually, God didn't want to destroy the Romans. He wanted to use the Romans' infrastructure to spread Christianity all over the globe.
Very good point. I mean, very, very good point. Very, very true. And you don't ever see it presented like what you just said, but that's the truth. Very good point.
Yeah. So that is essentially why you'll have a pro-slavery message in the New Testament. It wasn't about being, the idea wasn't like, because you see, as the nation of Israel, when they were in political power, it was about, eliminating slave trade. It was about everyone having equal rights. Slaves or Christians in a foreign land. It's really about converting the government that oppresses you through winning over the hearts and minds, not through insurrection, because at the end of the day, you're likely going to get defeated.
Right,
But
right. Of course.
yeah,
Of course.
so
Well, I think I don't really have much more to add. I think you did a really in-depth discussion about that, Ryan. It was very good. I think you connected a lot of dots that may not be connected a lot. Um,
mhm.
and I do not believe that there's a counter argument to what you just said without cherry picking individual scriptures and taking them out of context, which is what they always do, right?
Yeah.
When they lie about the Bible, they can only lie about the Bible by picking out select scriptures, taking them out of context, and not looking through them, through the proper exegesis. Like it's just ridiculous. It's dumb, and I don't really have anything more to add on this
Yeah.
topic. So I think we wrap it up here.
Context is key when it comes to the Bible, not just the verses and words around it, but understanding the culture and the history at the time.
Cultural
It's all
context, historical
the
context,
words came from
thematic
somewhere.
context. Right, right. They
Yeah,
came from
exactly.
somewhere, came from someone during a certain time in a certain area. But you have to not be a knuckle dragger to understand that, right?
Don't
So
drag those knuckles.
don't drag those knuckles. Don't be a mouth breather. Um, like, share, and subscribe. We appreciate every one of your subscriber support. So please hit that subscribe button. Please comment. Let's discuss these things in the comment below, and hit like. So Dr. Stephen Lowe with Adam Revival, Ryan Listerman. We're out. Peace.
Amen.